All right, if you weren't here in the beginning and you're confused, this is our costume service, and so we do this just for the fun of it, because we can. And we're not trying to be irreverent or disrespectful or anything. We are having fun in the way that we believe that the divine calls us to have and enjoy our lives. And this is one of the things I enjoy. This is a part of myself. I decided to be inspired today by Maleficent. So since the new movie is out, and I love that story of a misunderstood character, how she had been demonized from, back when the story first came out, and now you see how she really is this caring person who's just a little on the dark side. So would you pray with me, please? Holy One, as the veil is still thin, we remember all of those who have gone before us, who have blazed a trail for us to move forward in equality and in abundance, in prosperity. And we thank you for them, for their lives, and we call them saints, those who are sacred to us and also sacred to you. May we hear a positive message today from their spirits to encourage us, to lead us forward in the way of Christ. Amen. So today is All Saints Sunday. All Saints Day was on Friday, and what we call Halloween or Halloween was on Thursday, and so this is my day to dress up. I stayed in my pajamas on Halloween because it's a little too crazy out there, and I think it just shows my age too. It's at that point in life where there's just a turning and going, all right, I can't. It takes hours to look this bad. So, my favorite color is purple, so I have to have my purple accents. Anyhow, it's a queer thing, this All Saints Day, because just like the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, we celebrate the dead. We celebrate their lives, and at the same time, there's a sadness about it too, of remembering people. And I have certain folks that I remember today on our altar. We have Pete Chandler over here, who died in the past year, who was a beloved member of this community, and I invited Chet up here too on the right, who was such a proponent of the card of kindness that he's standing next to there with one of our members, Shiloh. And so then they in particular I'm remembering today. There are so many others who are in our hearts. Do you ever just randomly think of someone? Maybe you smell someone's perfume and you think, oh, you get this memory, that's like my grandmother. Or you just see some landscape or something, you think, oh, that's like my uncle's farm. There are things that remind us of them, and I believe that those are holy messages to us to say, we're watching over you. We are with you, and especially, God is watching over you. Now today we also focus on the Beatitudes. And I always chuckle to myself when this reading comes up in the lectionary, because it is such the opposite of what we see in Christianity today. The Beatitudes. Blessed are those who are poor and meek and peacemakers and etc., etc. That doesn't look like a lot of what we're seeing in Christianity today. But, there's so many of us who are under the radar. We're not the minority, I don't think, of those who are genuine in our faith, and we seek to do good, and we seek to help the oppressed. I remember this scene whenever I think of the Beatitudes. I remember this scene in the life of Brian, Any Monty Python fans? Okay, good, I'm in the right place. So in the life of Brian, and not the life of me, I'm talking about the talking about the movie. So it's ironic when these people are standing in the presence of Jesus and they're cursing one another and they're arguing with each other just out of ear's reach from these loving words of Jesus in this Sermon on the Mount. And Brian's mother, unlike my mother, proposes the tragic entertainment of the town stoning, since she can't stand the company of these bickering few who made listening to Jesus practically impossible. And so to the stoning they did go. The so-called Beatitudes are familiar to many of us, especially those of us with church backgrounds. These sayings of Jesus were gathered together, just as the sayings of the Gospel of Thomas were. And they were gathered and written in a particular order, so they are not in narrative form. But in this setting, we see them in narrative form. In reality, Jesus probably said these things at various times, rather than in one long sermon. But regardless of that, let's focus on the truth of the Gospels of Luke, which we heard, as well as Matthew. Luke only had 4, but Matthew had 9. So we're going to go through this together. Matthew places Jesus up on a high place. We know that in ancient times, people saw the world as flat, and the sky is where divinity dwelt, right? That's the ancient world thinking. Jesus is placed in this narrative on a mountain, likely just a really big hill. The point is, Jesus placed up high where lofty teachings and goals are expected to come from. And then Jesus speaks, and he teaches about the lowliest of people. Isn't it ironic? Don't you think? Luke, on the other hand, whew, good morning. Luke, on the other hand, gets to the point, and he puts the sermon down in the valley. So, it's not necessarily the Sermon on the Mount in this case. It's both the Sermon on the Mount and in the valley. That's a queer thing on its own. And either way, the settings demonstrate a juxtaposition between the rich and the poor, the oppressor and the oppressed. There is something in the setting that tells us this story. So perhaps the people were waiting for Jesus to command them to legalistically stick to the law. Or perhaps they hungered for Jesus to feed their hatred for empire that oppressed them. Or maybe they even expected Jesus to affirm people of privilege over those who begged for wholeness. But Jesus did none of that. Instead, he spoke justice, peace, and humility. Not to be expected. Jesus spoke of blessedness, and our translation today said happiness, and not the sort of thrill that Brian's mother got from watching the stoning. She may have felt happy, but that is not the deep kind of joy that we're talking about with blessedness, with happiness. So here are Jesus' top 9 ways that you can tell that you are a part of this movement. Number 9. With Matthew, it's you are spiritually poor. With Luke, it's you are just poor. Just plain poor. So, blessed are the poor in spirit, or blessed are the poor. At first glance, this may sound like Jesus is saying that you're blessed if your spirituality isn't very good. The poor in spirit, right? Some churches may tell you that beating yourself up is good for you, but you will never hear that here. Spiritual poverty is letting go of whatever is holding you back from embracing your place in the family of God. It's about removing your stumbling blocks rather than boasting of them. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Number 8, blessed are you who mourn. To say happy are the sad makes no sense. Those are antonyms, happy and sad, right? In Matthew's understanding, to mourn is to remember. To mourn is to remember, to process. In their context, they remembered the struggles of the Jewish people, both in their past and present. And for Luke, he recognizes that people are weeping because of the struggle of life. So Matthew's more spiritual. Luke is getting straight down to the body stuff. It's said in legend that Luke was a doctor, so it makes sense that as he treated the body, so he cared about the body. And he promises that their weeping will turn into laughter. And as one of my favorite artists, Dolly Parton, said in Steel Magnolias, my favorite emotion is laughter through tears. And that's how I feel sometimes, is that if I'm missing someone and there are tears, then you remember that beautiful moment, that funny moment. And that mix there is a holy thing. Today we also remember the struggles of the LGBTQ community around the world. We remember the struggles of the early 20th century homophile movement, the gay rights movement of the 60s to the present, the lesbian feminist, and womanist movements, distinct, the fight for transgender rights and acceptance, the struggle for bisexual and pansexual people in a world of compulsory categories, and the struggle of genderqueer and intersex people who discern their complex identities in this binary society. And today we remember our community and our world's 38-year struggle with HIV and AIDS. So today we bring out our red AIDS memorial candle in remembrance of those 5,000 souls in MCC that we lost. Number 7, blessed are you who are humble. Humility has nothing to do with feeling bad about ourselves, and everything to do with living into our humanity. It's about realizing you are human and that you are not superhuman. I've had to learn that lesson real hard. You are not superhuman. You have enough responsibility not to try to be a superhero. We're all people, at least I think, right? Yeah. We are all people, and as such, we are all bearers of God's promises. Number 6, you most desire what God requires. We get an idea by our first reading that you do justice, in the words of Micah actually. We do justice, we love kindness, and we journey humbly with God. Doing justice is our call as prophets in the world. It is our call. We know injustice, inequality, and inequity when we see them, and God requires us as the beloved community to face injustice with action. When the book of Micah was written, the author clearly recognized injustice in their society. They imagined the most privileged in their society devouring the flesh of the most vulnerable. That was the analogy that they used. It wasn't literal. So they didn't have a cannibalism problem. They had an inequality problem, that it felt like these people were feeding on them. I know how that feels a little bit. To love kindness and goodness and mercy is to be authentic in our desire to be kind, good, and gracious in the world, encouraging others to be the same. As each of us meditates on the infinite ways that we can live in kindness, goodness, and mercy, we define the identity of our church and of the rest of the church universal. When we shine the goodness, it cannot be denied by the rest of the church. To journey humbly and wisely and carefully with God is to first remember God's omnipresence in our decision to live our lives with humility, wisdom, and care, we find God at the center of our own being. Just as we sang in that song, in the silence, I find God, I find myself. It also means continuing to move. Nobody has a spiritual journey standing still. It's a journey. There are times of rest, but we still move forward. The journey with God is truly a dance. I can't believe in some churches it's a sin to dance. That's a sin itself. It's a fully embodied dance, this spiritual journey. It may at times seem awkward as you learn new steps and gestures, but Jesus assures those who live in the dance will be fully satisfied. Number 5, blessed are the merciful. I love the words of Frederick William Faber's 19th century hymn, and we sing it from time to time. There's a wideness in God's mercy, like the wideness of the sea. There's a kindness in God's justice, which is more than liberty. There's no place where earthly sorrows are more felt than in God's heaven. There's no place where earthly failings have such kindly judgment given. The wideness of God's mercy is revealed to us, Jesus said, when we express wide mercy ourselves. Do it, and it will be given to you. We continue to proclaim in metropolitan community churches, you are welcome, no matter who you are, to fully participate in the community. So it's our calling and our joy to watch and pay attention as our embrace becomes wider and wider and wider. We always have more work to do. Number 4, you're pure in heart. Jesus says that the pure in heart will see God. And contrary to what your Sunday school teacher may have taught you, this is not about avoiding sexy thoughts. Be pure in heart. In MCC, we call that erotic prayer. Purity of heart really means singleness of heart, placing our heart in the heart of God. Lebanese Christian poet Khalil Gibran writes, when you love, you should not say, God is in my heart, but rather, I am in the heart of God. Number 3, you work for peace. Not as in the life of Brian, where they misunderstood as the cheesemakers. Blessed are the cheesemakers. Why are they blessed? But the peacemakers. We remember the life of Mohandas Gandhi, who through nonviolent resistance to the British Raj led people out of India and out of colonization. And Gandhi was not a superhuman who had never made mistakes, but rather was a deeply spiritual person who remained dedicated to peace and justice for his people, regardless of the repercussions, which included physical harm, imprisonment, and eventually his death. Gandhi inspired Martin Luther King Jr., and we can't forget queer Saint Bayard Rustin in the civil rights movement, who was a Quaker himself, and so he brought in some of those beliefs and traditions in as well. And our own Reverend Mel White, an MCC clergy, who founded the organization Soul Force, which does amazing work to bring LGBTQ people and the religious right together to try to have a sane conversation. Number 2, you're persecuted for doing what God requires. So we heard about Micah 6:8, which is one of those just, solid verses in progressive Christianity is, love God, lost my place. These lashes get in my way, just to let you all know. Living out Micah 6:8 is not easy. It's not something I can just check off of my to-do list every day. All we can do is live into justice, live into loving kindness, live into care-filled spiritual living. It's not that you are or you aren't. There is so much in between. And in the process, we find all the grace that we need. Number 1, blessed are you who are lied about, and evil things are said about you because of me. Woo! That was so anticlimactic. Like, down to number 1. Oh, blessed are you who are oppressed. This final beatitude, which is, beatitude is a blessing. Doesn't seem like a blessing. It's not something we would aspire to, and it's not something that we should seek out. We don't want to seek out being oppressed. But it is a sort of litmus test of whether or not we are living on the path. If we make it our mission as a church to serve the status quo, we have lost our way. Jacques Ellul said it this way: the church can only be a counter community. If it is anything other than that, it has already compromised itself. I know, I read this a couple weeks ago, but it's so central. It's such strong truth. The church can only be a counter community. If it's anything other than that, it's compromised itself. I mourn the loss of that kind of continuity within the church. But instead of focusing on that, I choose to focus on the good. And it's this kind of church here. If you read the newsletter on Friday, you saw the image as well. And it's a little, there's so much light, it's kind of hard to see. But this is St. Gregory of Nyssa Episcopal Church in San Francisco. And it used to be, when I lived there, one of my pilgrimage places to go to, because there are 90 saints painted